Hello again, YouTube, and welcome back to Game or Die. I am so stoked to be talking about today's episode because it's about a shoot 'em up, or shmup as they're called, that was made smack dab in the middle of the PC gaming golden age. It's very near and dear to my heart, and I'm really excited to talk about it. I do have to say though, quick disclaimer, there is a little bit of inconsistency with the video quality in this one. Had some software issues. We're all good now. So that being said, let's take a look at Raptor, Call of the Shadows. Raptor was released April 1st, 1994, and was made by budding developer Cygnus Studios, which later became Mountain King Studios, and was published by the absolutely legendary Apogee software, which went on to become 3D Realms. You play as a mercenary flying the super tech Raptor Interceptor hired by Megacore to destroy its top competitors. The world created by this game was unique. Gone were the days of your bright, colorful, bubblegum Wonderland type games. Thanks to games like Doom, Wing Commander, and Syndicate, dark and gritty was the way to be. If you take a look at the opening sequence, for example, which is pretty rad in its own right, you'll see what I mean. There's an insinuation of a dark, dystopian, corporate-run future, and it looks the part. While the game is colorful, it's also slightly desaturated. Colorful, yet depressing. I like it. Raptor was the brainchild of Scott Host, who started programming when he was only 16 years old. He started Cygnus Studios and made his first game, the excellent shoot-'em-up gem Galactics, in 1992. Some members of the Cygnus team went on to become pretty prolific in the gaming industry, going on to become director of production at Sony Computer Entertainment America in Jim Molinetz, and Rich Fleeter went on to work at Gearbox Software on games like Borderlands and Duke Nukem Forever. Not sure I'd put that last one on my resume, Rich. So with the shareware scene exploding in 1994, Cygnus released Raptor for the PC on MS-DOS. This was at the very tail end of the shoot-'em-up golden age, and was one of the last mainstream titles in the genre, until at a resurgence in the late 2000s anyway. It was probably influenced by games like 1942 and 43, and Raiden, but with the entire shoot-'em-up golden age behind it, it was probably a multitude of games. It would later go on to be ported to pretty much everything out there, including Linux and iOS, and has since been re-released on Windows multiple times. Today it can be purchased on 3D Realms' website, Mountain King Studios' website, and on Steam. Upon booting up the game, you'll be greeted by an excellent opening cutscene, which, as previously mentioned, set the tone for the game very, very well. Even the music is dark and ominous. First, you'll create your pilot, whom you name and even assign a likeness to. I always pick this guy. I like his skunk stripe theme he has going here and his studly beard, and I always thought that earring was pretty sharp. Man, even as a kid I was weird. So here's the point where Raptor really starts to veer away from convention. In your typical shmup, you fly as a faceless, nameless pilot, you pick up power-ups and other upgrades along the way in battle. Your progress is tracked by points, and in the end, you enter your initials on the high scoreboard, usually spelling out names like Dick and Ass. However, in Raptor, you'll have an overarching career, and every enemy you kill awards you with money, not points. You then choose how to spend that money between missions. So calling the player a mercenary is actually pretty accurate, it's not just some gimmick. The pricing is also done very well. Weapons are pricey, and you really have to work to earn them. It's a rewarding feeling simply purchasing the weapon that you've been saving for. And when weapons drop in battle, which is pretty rare, it's a big deal. Even if you already have it, you can sell it between missions and make a big chunk of cash. Even weapons are treated differently when compared to established shoot-'em-up conventions. Weapon power-ups are usually picked up, at which point they become your primary weapons, and you lose a previous one. Not in Raptor. You can carry several, at least 10 by my count, at the same time. These weapons are treated similarly to an FPS. You can have many, but you can only use one at a time. There are a few weapons that are always equipped, regardless of which weapons you have selected, but the majority of them are exclusive. This is great because you don't have to choose between air-to-air missiles or air-to-ground missiles. You can carry both and switch as needed. The levels in Raptor are broken down into 3 sectors: Bravo, Tango, and Outer Regions. Each sector consists of 9 waves. Each wave ends with a boss. That's 27 bosses. See how fast I did that math? Like any shoot 'em up, levels are straightforward. You're always traveling vertically on your screen, and enemies fly at you, sometimes in patterns, sometimes random, sometimes on a collision course. Some of these common enemies are pretty badass, taking and dishing out some pretty heavy damage. These are great because it prevents you from steamrolling the entire wave, especially later on, and it really keeps you on your toes. There are also ground targets that harass you the entire time as well. While the enemies only slightly vary in terms of flight patterns and weapons, Cygnus really went out of their way in enemy design. For example, the mine layer behaves identically in Bravo, Tango, and the Outer Regions, but they created a different looking mine layer for each sector. They totally didn't have to do this, but they did it anyway, and this applies to many different enemies. They deserve kudos for that. The weapons in Raptor are great. Most of them are a pleasure to use and actually can behave very differently from each other, making you change your playstyle. Let's take a look at what weapons and gadgets are for sale at Harold's Death Emporium. First, we have the energy module. In FPS terms, this is your health and armor. This replenishes both your hull and your phase shield. Next is the ion scanner. This is the fancy term for thingy what lets you see boss health. Get it as early as you can. Next you have the SA-17 Aries phase shield. This adds another life bar and you can equip up to 5 at a time. Needless to say, get as often as you can. Occasionally these will actually drop in game. Those are good days. And there's the MG-21C Reaver twin machine guns, your base weapon. This is a great base weapon. It attacks both air and ground targets, and it fires from the wing of your craft, not the nose. This means that you don't have to line up perfectly with your target, which can really save your bacon. As a bonus, it has fantastic DACA. Next up, the Dearborn Industries Firestorm Plasma Cannon. It sounds really fancy, but all this weapon does is add a little bit more pew-pew to your base damage, and it's always equipped. Definitely pick this one up for that reason alone. Then there's the micro missile. It's always equipped, so there's no reason not to have it. Just a little bit more DPS with no negatives. Next is the AIM-31 Mauler air-to-air missile. This is your early game bread and butter. I basically actively switched between this and the air-to-ground missile for the first 25% or so of the game. Next is the AGM-26L Banshee air-to-ground missile. This is great to carry on you in battle, but not a great primary weapon to have equipped all the time. I found myself switching to this often, but only in spurts of about a few seconds. It's great against ground-based bosses, as its damage is heavy. Now the cleverly named Mark 133 Bomb. For all intents and purposes, this is basically a heavier damaging air-to-ground missile, but it fires so slowly that I found myself barely using it. Next is the DM1R Psycho Dumbfire missiles. This is a great early weapon. Damage is good, and it can attack both air and ground targets. More importantly though, the missiles have a nice big spread, so you can easily hit enemies without being in their exact line of fire. It's an excellent versatile weapon that I found myself using for the majority of my playtime. You'll probably end up using this all the way up until the end game, probably the end of the outer regions. You'll switch to energy weapons, but until then, this is going to be your bread and butter. Next up is the TH19 Thor Auto-Track Minigun. This gun is so cool, but it just doesn't really have a place in the game. By the time you can afford it, you'll have much better options available to you. Still a blast to use though. Then there's the AARL-1201 Scatter Pack Missile Pod. The individual missiles of this weapon do less damage than, say, the air-to-air missiles. However, the Scatter Pack fires it so fast that its DPS is much higher, and it's very difficult for enemies to avoid them. This is a good stepping stone from your dumbfires and other missile weapons to your energy-based weapons. Next is the Power Disruptor. This is a good weapon, but not as a primary. It only really affects certain targets, and it does moderate damage to the ones that it doesn't. For 300,000 credits, I don't think it's really worth it, I'm sorry to say. Then there's the OD55 Odin laser turret. Fantastic weapon. I would go as far as saying it's a bit overpowered. It has 360 degrees of rotation, 100% accuracy, and it hits hard. You can essentially hide in a corner and fire away with this. The only weakness is that it doesn't target anything on the ground. Next up is the RX1 Tsunami Pulse Cannon. The Pulse Cannon is a fine weapon really, it's a good all-rounder, targets both air and ground, but by the time you have enough money for it, the far superior death ray is just a short ways away. For that reason, the Pulse Cannon is often skipped over. And speaking of the death ray, here it is, the MSIL Atlas death ray, the perfect all-rounder. Fries enemy and air targets and even dispatches bosses pretty quick. The only downside is that it fires from the nose, which means you might have to get in harm's way to be able to engage the enemy. Worth 950 grand easily though. Next is the CL10 Eclipse Twin Laser. This is it. Tears up everything in sight, both air and ground. More damage than the Death Ray, but more importantly, it fires from the wing of your craft. Look at that badassery. And finally, the CBU-80 Guillotine Mega Bomb. This is the big mama. The weapon that has its very own key assigned to it. This baby sweeps the screen clear of all enemies and heavily damages bosses. When you launch a Mega Bomb, you can actually see it drop from your ship and tumble through the air. Call me easily amused, but how awesome is that? Unlike most shoot-em-ups, there are actually a lot of destructibles in the environment. Now, in Raptor, having a destructible environment is actually a really good thing because everything that blows up, everything that you can destroy, gives you money. And money means weapons, and that's what we all live for. There are extra ways to make money in battle by picking up bonus items. Now, these items do have an official name, but I will tell you what they are called based on what I named them when I played this game originally in 1994. You have Box of Guns, Plutonium from Back to the Future, Starfleet Shuttle, Booger, and the Meteor. So, here's where the details really start to shine in Raptor. There are so many cool little things in the background. I always find my eyes scanning everything on the screen at any given time, just so I could see what cool little doodads or beautifully drawn locales I can find. For example, there's a crashed UFO on the Mars-like background, enemy air sites where you can actually see the little crew trying to reload and shoot you down. Ancient ruins, which you destroyed, obviously, because stupid history. Get some, yeah! Enemy air bases, a large crashed ship, enemy tank depot, etc. Additionally, if the date on your computer matches one of the programmer's birthdays, you get some funny little Easter eggs. March 2nd for Bobby Prince, May 16th for Scott Host, August 28th for Rich Fleeter, and October 2nd for Jim Molinitz. On those dates, you get a funny little alternate opening.
You boys just don't get it, do you?
You get giant lizards running across the screen. You have gorillas throwing coconuts at you, of course. And you even have giant cow missile launchers. And you even get this little weird giggle upon exit. Good stuff. And the 2D pixel graphics totally hold up. Everything in Raptor is not only beautifully drawn, but beautifully designed. The explosions are fluid and highly detailed. Even the player's death animation is spectacular. The best way to describe Raptor's music is very DOS. All music was MIDI, all day long. Is this a bad thing? No! MIDI music is awesome! Check it out! The sound effects are done very, very well. Bad sound effects are something of a pet peeve of mine. We're talking gunshots, engine noises, environmental effects, you name it. But in Raptor, Even the base minigun sounds perfect. Everything sounds fierce and explosions are loud and powerful as they should be. Controls in Raptor are plush. Control fires, arrows move, Alt changes weapons, and spacebar drops the Mega Bomb. It's a very smooth setup. Your hands sit in very natural places, and switching weapons in mid-battle and back again works flawlessly. The jet you fly has a good weight to it. It's not too floaty and it's not too stiff. They totally nailed it. Unsurprisingly, the reception to Raptor was warm. Acclaimed by both media and fans alike, it takes its place as one of the greatest shmups of all time. Average scores for Raptor range anywhere from 7 out of 10 to a perfect score. It's absolutely loved by fans to this day, which is one of the reasons why it was ported to so many different platforms and carries a very positive rating on Steam with 108 reviews. Most gripes come from poor porting or lack of updates for modern systems. The legitimate gripe this game ever gets is really just repetitiveness. While I agree to an extent, that's really an inherent weakness of the genre, not necessarily a design flaw. My only real personal gripe is the lack of diversity in bosses. There are basically two types, giant ship and giant base, and you pretty much approach every boss with the same tactic, which is a little stale. There have been no sequels to date, but the game retains a cult following. I have no doubt it has heavily influenced the developers of the recent shoot-'em-up renaissance, which has been going on for the past several years. The game lives on through its fans and remains a gem in the crown of PC gaming history. That's all, folks. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked what you saw, please hit like, please hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.